It's a while since we've done this, Max. Are you ready to go?
I think so. Do you remember when you went back to school after the summer holidays and you couldn't write? And it was like, Sir, I can't write. It hurts too much. This is a bit like this.
Well, hello again. It's been a few weeks, but we're back with Season 2 of The Tyre Kickers.
In Season 2, we do all the stuff we did in Season 1, but to slightly different music.
Well, coming up, it's the return of Crush or Caress. Hanging off the grabber this time around, it's the midwife's favourite motor, the Morris Minor.
There's auction action, and we pose the big question. Are we being forced towards classic car extinction?
Plus details of where we've been and what we've seen, with hopefully a few laughs along the way.
So strap yourself back in as we jumpstart Season 2 of The Tyre Kickers. So happy 2025 and all that. We've had January off because Matt is like a grumbly old diesel engine and doesn't work well in the cold. Plus, I've been away on holiday in New Zealand, and the highlight for that was a visit to the factory where they used to assemble old British Leyland cars.
Yeah, I saw your pictures on Instagram. What an absolute sad act you are. I mean, you've gone to the other side of the world for some post-Christmas rest, and instead you're searching out a place where you can look at 70s rust. I mean, seriously, Max, Kiwi Marinas. I know you like a bit of BL, but seriously?
But it's not just marinas. That's the great thing about it. Princesses
Fantastic.
too. It was the old factory of the New Zealand Motor Corporation, and they used to assemble knockdown kits of British cars that were sent over on a boat. I put a photo on Instagram of a parts kit Princess as it arrived in the factory with kind of doors apart and stuff. But New Zealand has a long and glorious history of assembling kits of British cars. Rover was there in the 30s. Morris and Austin had separate factories for knockdown kits. After the Second World War, they made Austin A70s, Rover 75s, Mark V Jags even. Triumph was there, and Triumph used to assemble Land Rovers, which were really popular.
Before you go off on one, I think we should talk about knockdown kits, because this was a thing, wasn't it? Back in the old days, if you wanted to buy a British car, they didn't just stick them in a crate and a container and ship them around the world. They actually used to take them apart, didn't they? And then build them back together in the country. That's what it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was a tax thing, because if they were made in the country, if you see what I mean, you got a better tax rate rather than just importing them. So it was cheaper to import them as kits and put them together in a local factory than pay the tax on being imported.
Okay, I mean, most British cars would eventually fall apart, but with knockdown kits, they sort of started the process early, did they? I mean, this was something that BL was into in a fairly big way, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, by the 70s, British Leyland had 25% of the New Zealand market. So they had popular cars with Marinas, Austin 1100s, Mini Clubmans, and of course the mighty, mighty Princess in all its velour glory. So 4,000 Princesses were shipped over and made, 14,000 Triumph 2000s, they were really popular, 1,300 Rover P6 V8s. That's a nice car. I saw one in the oh god, P6 is such a good car. You're moaning about it already. Loads and loads of Land Rovers, a few Rover SD1s, and about 1,000 Jaguar XJ6s. But guess what happened?
Sorry, you finished. I was actually doing a bit of my self-assessment.
You're doing your nails, are you?
Yeah, doing a tax return while you were wittering on. Sorry. Guess what happened? What happened?
The Japanese arrived. And pretty much every car now on the road in New Zealand is Japanese. So compared to those figures I was talking about, 1,000 Jaguar XJ6s, they made 85,000 Honda Civics. And do you know why people stopped buying Princesses?
Because Japanese
cars.
Oh.
No. Well, they weren't rubbish, but Japanese cars were a lot better.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't driven a kind of like a modern car for a while, and I had a Subaru Forester hire car, and it was great. It was amazing. The only thing about it, though, and you've got a 2024 car, so you might know this, is that the beeping from the safety gear beeps at you all the time. The tugs on the steering wheel. It complains if you overtook. It had little lights, warning lights flashing all the time. I mean, basically, it didn't like me or my driving.
A lot of it's dangerous though, Max, I think. I like that like lane assist stuff. Suddenly you're fighting with the car to get... I know, you have to switch it off manually every time you get in a car. It's really, really...
Because also, if you overtake something and then you pull back in, it's actually trying to stop you pulling back in. So it's trying to keep you in the other lane facing oncoming traffic. It's bonkers.
It is bonkers, and it's the beepy kind of stuff, which is why kind of old classic cars are getting more and more appealing, aren't they? Did you see many classics about? down
Yeah,
there.
it's a really good classic scene in New Zealand, actually. They've taken quite a few American 50s and 60s cars and turned them into right-hand drives, which makes it
Okay.
a lot nicer down there. But the roads are absolutely amazing. I mean, not many motorways. So if you want to get somewhere in a hurry, it's a bit slow. But for driving around, the scenery is amazing, the roads are amazing. And for me, the biggest highlight, lots of abandoned Land Rovers in fields I could go and have a look around. So just for that, that was worth the jet lag.
No, it sounds great. It does sound really good. I don't know if I could cope with the journey over there. To be honest, it's a long way
Stop
to
your
go.
moaning. Stop your moaning.
But it's good to
Listen,
have you back.
If there's a princess at the end of this journey, it's worth it.
Well, I definitely work with one on this podcast, that's for sure.
So what about you then? What about you, Matthew? How's the Hillman Husky going?
Well, while you've been enjoying, the climate in your t-shirt, I've been looking out the window here, the rain, which has cooled off quite a few classic meets. It's a lot of waterlogged fields and stuff like that. So there's not been much car action. The one that I normally go to, the New Year, got kind of rained off and rearranged. My car's still in storage, so nothing's really happening there. Although naturally, I have been looking in the interim at what to replace it with.
Oh, what have you come up with?
Well, I've come around in a big circle, to be honest. And I've
just for a change.
But you do that sometimes because the reason you sometimes, quite often why you pick your classic car is because you've made a sort of list in your head about what you like and what you want and what you need to use it for, and it's ticked all the boxes. You do, though, fall in and out of love with it, and you do think about replacing it. But I find with a lot of these things, you go around in a circle and you come back to what you actually want and what you're going to use. And my Sunbeam Alpine, 1968, does tick all the boxes for now. However, devil makes work for idle hands and all that sort of stuff, and as does the internet. So I've already got on my list an XJC. After we talked about them, I got slightly obsessed with those.
You've liked those for years, though. I remember about 10 years ago, you were drooling over one of those at an auction.
I know, but you always end up drooling over the car that's a bit more expensive than all the others, don't you? And a bit rarer. There is something about a vinyl roof in that coupe, and there's one near me up for about 20,000. But I don't know. I'm sort of a little bit scared of it in a way because I just think
it's a V12.
Well, it's no. It was a 4.2, I think.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, they're really rare. They didn't make many of those.
That's a good one to have because it's quite easy to maintain. But I don't know. I just kind of think if I make a bad purchase with an XJC, it could bite me. Then I start thinking about old Mercs again and old saloons. And I do want an old Merc. There is something about the style of an old Merc. And I do fancy it. I will get one at some point. But I don't know. I'm probably good as I am. As I say, my car, my Alpine is not expensive to run. I enjoy using it for the things I do. It's fun on the right occasions, and for me, it's probably enough to get that classic car fix. Talking of fixes, I've already made the list of fixes that I've got to attack with. So when it comes out of storage,
this list has been going for years. I mean, you've never got round to some of these things, isn't it? So is this the year you're actually going to get round to them?
Well, no. So the list. If you have a classic car, you always have a list, and it's either written down or it's on your phone. There's always a running list of stuff. So there's an oil leak, for example, which sort of sprung up towards late summer last year. Hopefully, it's just the sump plug washer that's a bit dicky, but I suspect it's coming from the block.
You wish.
It's just.
It's just a 5p washer.
I've deliberately not looked too hard at where out the block it's coming. So hopefully, it's like higher rather than lower. But we've got to get that fixed. The brakes have been on my list for a while, and I just haven't got around to tackling them. But they're quite grabby and unpredictable. So sometimes they bite at the top, sometimes they bite further down. They're a bit lumpy. I've been advised that maybe the servo needs replacing, which is not too bad. They've been bled, but there's something not quite right with them. The brake's fine, but the travel of the pedal is the issue. The car isn't level. But that's going to be a whole heap of pain trying to level it out. So I might leave that. And I've got a heavy clutch. Well, I think I've got a heavy clutch. And I drove another one that didn't have a heavy clutch. And then when you've got that comparison, it's quite annoying. So do I sort that? I think I'm probably just going to do the service, the oil leak and the brakes for now, because they're sort of fairly important things, rather than start digging a big hole at the start of the season, because that can be depressing, can't it?
Yeah, sometimes I think you just got to live with it. As long as it's moving and stopping in a kind of fashion, I'd leave it alone.
Okay. And what about your red convertible that you bought right at the end of the season?
Well, I've had it out today, actually, because it hasn't been raining today. And it's a Merc, and it's been parked up, for 8 weeks? Started straight away, drove straight away, heaters on. Nice. Top's going to be down tomorrow because I think the sunshine's going to peek out, even though it's freezing. So
System up with the top down.
It's a Mercedes. It's going to work, isn't it?
Have you got plans for it? You got road trip plans? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think so. To be honest, I'm going to tool around in it a bit because you know what it's like. Need to get to know a new car. You need to get used to it and its foibles. And I think I'm just going to tool around for maybe like 2 or 3 months, and then I'd quite like to take it up to Yorkshire and maybe the Lake District. That's a kind of good place to go. And the other thing I was thinking actually on holiday is the Isle of Wight. I do quite fancy driving around the Isle of Wight because the scenery is great. As long as you keep the sea on your left or your right, you can't go wrong. So I think it'd be quite a nice trip, the Isle of Wight. It's a nice little boat trip to go over there.
Actually, it's very popular with old people, so I think you're fitting quite well. In
See you there.
anticipation, in anticipation of having to start talking nonsense again, we sort of had a school outing yesterday, didn't we? We went to somewhere that I'm amazed that you've never been. I'm talking about the excellent Haynes Motor Museum in Somerset. You've genuinely never been there before.
No, I haven't. I was really impressed actually because it's a little jewel in the middle of Somerset, isn't it? Just when you're driving down the A303, you can stop off and have a look at some. Well, that red room was fantastic, full of red sports cars. I mean, that was amazing.
Yeah, the story of this museum, it's John Haynes, as in the Haynes manual. And because of the success of the Haynes manuals over the years, he was able to start a car collection. And he was quite obsessive about what he collected. And he's collected some beautiful cars, including, as Max mentioned there, red sports cars. He just decided one day that he wanted to buy as many red sports cars as he could so he could see the differences and appreciate the differences between the cars without getting swayed by the way the car looked in a different color. So you walk into this room and it's a big room, isn't it? And it's just full of red convertibles.
Yeah, and some very tasty stuff in there. But I think you and I, we stopped at the Alpha Spider Duetto, didn't we? Which is always a favourite of both of ours. They still look amazing. Don't drive as nicely as possibly they look. And what else? What did you like in the red room? What else took your fancy?
There's an MGA in there that just looked great. I just think they're great cars. Whether they're great cars to own and drive, I'm not too sure. But every time I see one now, I just think that, they're just really, really good cars. There was a Ford Mustang, which we both kind of sort of scratched our heads at. I kind of like it, but I don't. It was a 60s one. That sort of it just looks a bit ungainly, doesn't it? But it's American. But even like Porsche Boxster and stuff, I think I quite like in there. There was a Sunbeam Tiger in there. I just think it's just really interesting from an aesthetic point of view to see all those cars.
And that really nice Healy. There was a lovely Healy 3000 there, wasn't there? Which is kind of a car that you and I don't really ever talk about, but they are fantastic. We should do, actually, because
I think they're great.
They're great cars, yeah.
So, it's a good museum. You moaned because you couldn't get chips in the...
oh, come on. It's a cafe. Where are the chips? It's a cafe. It's Britain. Do chips. I mean, it's not a difficult equation, is it?
A little window into the tyre kick as well. Whenever Max and I go out and it comes to lunch, he always orders something healthy, but with chips. So there's obviously
chips are healthy, really.
He's got this sort of thing. He's got his voice in his head going, "You must eat healthy." So there's always soup and chips. You find so you pulled a face because there wasn't any chips, and we ended up having to go find a pub, which we had a really nice actually pub lunch next to a fire, didn't we? Which was really nice, and a pint of beer and all that sort of stuff. So that was good. It gave you something to do, didn't it? It gave you a little. I mean, I kind of think for me, it was a little bit giving back, a bit caring the community, help the aged, get you out of your house. But we started looking at cars again, which is good. So I suppose we should start talking about them.
Yeah, I think it's time for one of our favourite features from last year, which is Crush or Caress.
So, back in the mists of time.
Yes, last year.
We created our Crush or Caress feature. Now, the idea wasn't complicated, surprise, surprise. But what we do is we pick a classic car and we ask, do we polish it or do we push it? And in this case, into the car crusher to be recycled into a can or something more useful.
So we crushed an Allegro after much argument and a Skoda Favorit to universal agreement. And I had to save the MG Metro, which is your crazy idea to crush. And then you crushed the XR3i as well, I think. Yeah. But this time I've got something to offer to the scrapyard gods. I'll happily press the start button on this. It's the Morris Minor.
Are you being serious?
Yeah,
Morris Minor. Oh, it's a classic. What's the matter with you?
It's just rubbish.
What? That's like saying crush a 2CV or something. It's the...
Oh, no, because the 2CV's got really good character. The problem with a Minor is it was a design, a post-war design. It came out in 1948. Yeah. And if it had been canned in 1958 and done a decade of decent service, then yeah, okay, you could get it. But it just laboured on till 1971. And it's one of the problems with the British car industry for me is that it didn't innovate. It just got stuck on something that was easy to produce. It churned them out. It didn't have to challenge anybody. They fiddled with the engine every so often in the kind of Series 2 and Series 3 and ended up with the A series. I think it should have been killed off about 10 years in. It's basically, you remember the Hindustan Ambassador in India, which was the Morris 8 that kept on being produced for 50 odd years. It's like the British Hindustan Ambassador. It should have been killed off years ago, and instead it was hanging around for so long.
Whoa. Is your problem with a classic car that it was so popular that they kept making it, and two, it was so reliable that it keeps running and they're everywhere now? Is that your problem with a Minor?
No, it wasn't that reliable because firstly it rusted into a heap, didn't it? They used to collapse in the middle because there was so much rust in them, or the suspension would come through the body. So it wasn't reliable really because it rusted. The engine was kind of asthmatic and really weedy, and it just looks a bit rubbish, doesn't it? They didn't really improve it. So compared to the Beetle, you say it's successful at 1.5 million. The Beetle outsold it by 10 times because they took the Beetle and then they made it in factories around the world and they changed it and they developed it and made it better. The Morris Minor was just left to lumber on, soldier on really slowly for 20 odd years.
But it's still one of the most popular classics on the road. I mean, I know obviously we go back, you and we go back to working in newsrooms together. And obviously one of the things I remember is facts don't normally bother you. So I've looked some up for you.
That is rich coming from you.
Let me give you some facts. On how many left, it says there's 15,000 Minors still on the roads in Britain today. I mean, that's an awful lot for classic cars. You know what's that?
Yeah, but it still doesn't mean they're good, does it? That just means there's a lot of midwives out there, a lot of people trying to solve crimes with Miss Marple. It's not good just because there's a lot of them.
Oh, you've only been back about 10 minutes and you've got my blood pressure up.
Well, at least you've still got it. It's better than having no blood pressure, isn't it?
Here's some arguments, look, from me to save the Minor. One is style. I think it's one of the more stylish classics. Whatever you think. Shut your face for a moment.
It's so ugly.
And you can improve that style with a restoration. And these cars can be plain Janes, and they can actually be really classy. A few of our followers have got them, and one of them is restoring one in Australia. And they've restored it with a really nice black paintwork with a red leather interior. It looks fantastic. Cost, they're cheap to buy, they're cheap to run. I mean, have a look on Car and Classic. They start with about 2,500. They go up to, they're around about 5,000 is the sweet spot, and a bit more if you want to get a really nice one. Plenty of choice. Parts are cheap. They're easy to find. Try saying that about some trim for a Lancia Fulvia. It's not complex as well. And do you know what? Part of the thing about a classic car is it's going to go wrong on a regular basis. So you need someone friendly around the corner who can fix it. And I would argue if you've got a Morris Minor, your local garage or your old school mechanic is happily going to work on that. Now, you try taking a Jaguar V12 around the corner and asking them to do it. They may work on it. You're going to get a massive bill. You're not going to get a massive bill on that. I think you're going to get lots of smiles per gallon. It makes people smile. They're very popular with women, which is a demographic that's really, really underrepresented in classic cars. And I just think they make, I think they're just happy classic cars. I haven't got a problem with it. I don't particularly want one. I don't think they're fantastic to drive. I just think they're fun. They make you smile. They're like a 2CV.
But, and there's a big but here, if you're going to buy a Morris Minor, which is ancient technology, why don't you buy something which was actually forward-looking at the time, which has still got all the things that you were talking about, still cute, still interesting. It's a much better drive. It comes from the same manufacturer, a Morris Mini. A Mark I Mini is a really interesting car to drive. It's an interesting car that was made. It was a world leader. It's got parts. It's got all the things that you were moaning about, but it's got interest in it. It's a great drive and it has something important because it was a great piece of British engineering.
I think this is where you and I come at different angles. I think with you, a classic car, the first thing you think of is sort of the engineering and what's under the bonnet. For me, does it look nice from every angle? Open the door, what's the interior like? And then I think about the sort of engine last. It's just a different approach that we've got. I think progress is not necessarily a good thing. We were standing looking at an Aston Martin Lagonda yesterday, weren't we? And just saying that, back in the 80s, that was a wow car. It's futuristic. And now it just looks weird, and badly designed and odd and with an odd dated interior. It's not dated very well. So I don't think progress is necessarily a good thing. Your argument is essentially they made them for too long and they're a bit boring. I'm sorry, that's not a good enough argument to crush it.
What's the rules on crushing? can I crush it independently, or do we have to agree, or is there a kind of vote system, or how do we do it?
It's basically like a verbal arm wrestle. One of us has to give in at some point. So I think if I just keep going on, you might give in.
No change there.
I'm sensing weakness, so I'm going to go for it. Your argument's pretty flimsy because you're basically saying
it's not. It's not flimsy at all. It's about the British car industry. It's a bigger story than the Morris Minor.
British Leyland.
The Morris Minor is symptomatic of what went wrong. I'm trying to say I don't want to remember it. Yeah, but princesses actually, the design of them was quite forward thinking. The Morris Minor was dated when it came out in 1948.
15,000 still on the road. That there is a reason that 15,000 are still kept, maintained, and run. It's because they're a great classic car. I think
the only piece of sense you've made is that they're cheap, and they are cheap, and that's good. They are cheap, but that's the only argument that you've made that has actually resonated.
I'm going to call this. I'm going to say actually, and I think anybody listening will agree. I think you're out of your depth on this one. You're off to the deep end. Off you go. Walk the plank. The car is not going in the crusher.
I've got 2 words to say to you. Hindustan ambassador.
Well, you're listening to episode 24, the official start of season 2, 2025 for the Tyre Kickers. It's great to have you along. Thank you for continuing to listen to our nonsense. But here at the Tyre Kickers, we do like to keep an eye on what's crossing the block of the classic car auction scene here in the UK. It just kind of gives us a sense of what's going on. And it is starting to come back. Auction season is back as the weather slowly starts to get better and Christmas fades off into the rearview mirror. So let's have a look at a few choice picks. Max, what have you got?
It's exciting to get back to the auction. So starting at Barron's in Southampton on Saturday, the 8th of February. Now, here's a really interesting barge. I've got a bit obsessed by these. It's a 1979 Mercedes W116 Saloon. Now, fans of the film Ronin will remember the 6.9 450 SEL W116 blowing up that Peugeot 406 in the chase. But this is the lowly 280 SE. So this is basically the first Mercedes S-Class. It's a big slab of car, and this one is up at a reserve of 4,000 to 5,500. Now, this is the one that's underpowered by the 2.8 litre M1110 straight 6. So there'll be no car chases here. But what an alternative to a Silver Shadow. Just have a look at this. It's a kind of silvery blue. It's a big car, even by current standards. It's about 5 metres long, so it's Range Rover big. But look inside, it's got the blue velour interior. What is better than that?
Not so sure. I do like Mercedes. I like old Mercedes. I just wonder whether it's a bit like, when you get in a 123, and a 123 is always heralded as the most, bomb-proof car that there is, and a real classic. But sometimes you get in a 123 and it's just a bit underwhelming. And I wonder whether this would be a little bit underwhelming as well. I mean, it is essentially an old school executive taxi, isn't it, to the airport?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, 2 things. It's got wipers on the headlights, which is always cool. Okay. And then this is, 4,500 to 5,000. So that's quite exciting. But inevitably, I started looking at these and doing the research. And then I was up to the 6.9s, which are like 55,000. So it started off cheaply, now less so. But I still think, it's the classic lot of car for money. It's a Merc, so it should be all right. And it's got the really good engine. I mean, the 2.8 is not fast. You won't be doing many overtakes. But it is a really solid engine. It sounds quite nice as well.
I'd like to look at it in the flesh. For me, I don't know whether it sort of falls in that bit in the middle where it's not quite old enough to be cool. I wonder whether it's one of those ones that's just a bit plain. I don't know.
Yeah, but that means you're ahead of the game. You're at the cutting edge in that case, aren't you? You are leading the pack. That's what I like about these kind of like 70s and 80s Mercs, is that you're right. They're in that in-between zone, but I do think this is quite cool. And also, I was mentioning this to you the other day. As an alternative to a Silver Shadow, it's a kind of third of the price of a Silver Shadow. It won't have half the running costs. And I think it's a little bit under the radar cool.
Well, if you want to have a look at that one, that's Max says that's up at Barron's in the February Classic 2025 auction, guided for 4,300 to 5,500. Lot 110, that is. So go and have a look and see what you think. Okay, from a Mercedes to a pocket hot rod, a 1965 Sunbeam Tiger Mark One. This is up at the Iconic sale on the February the 22nd. That's in Warwickshire. Now, we did a bonus episode on these if you want to scroll back if you've not heard that. And the story basically with the Sunbeam Tiger is it's a Sunbeam Alpine that they wanted sort of hot rod for the American markets. They got Carroll Shelby of Cobra fame involved, and he wedged a 4.5 litre engine in it, V8, which transformed the car, and really it was wedged, really wedged. I've had a ride in one of these. I've seen quite a few up close, and they do shift. So if you're interested in a really interesting V8 with a real provenance and a bit of history, this is an interesting one. And I'll tell you for why, Max. Look at that guide price, 35,000 to 40,000 for this car. It's in red. It's on mini light wheels. It's got a black, I think it's a mohair hood on there. The interior is really nice. The bodywork looks really nice. And it's got that story. And I tell you what, you will have fun in that car. But the interesting thing is the guide price is half, a little less than half of what these things were going for 4 years ago at the height of the COVID thing. They were kind of going 60, 70, some of these. So it's definitely worth a look. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's also been restored in the past, which is good, both the body and the engine. It's also had an upgraded cooling system, a new aluminium radiator and electric fan, because those things do heat up. Big engine, small space. I think that's a pretty good buy. And like you said, it seems to be a lot cheaper than they were a year, 2, 3 years ago.
I think it's really interesting and definitely worth a look because, to all intents and purposes, this looks like an Alpine, which is let's be honest, is an underpowered 60s car. But because it was hot rodded with this V8, a Ford V8, it makes a great noise and they do shift. I mean, they are actually, if you want to scare yourself in a classic car, put your right foot down on this quite fast because the back flies around all over the place. But there are a few idiosyncrasies to owning this. But it's a great club support, great part support. There's loads of good specialists who are not expensive. I think it's definitely worth a look. And yeah, if you want to have a look at that car, it's February 22nd, Iconics auction, lot 602. And if you want to find out more about Tigers in general, as I mentioned, go back to our bonus episode and listen to the Tiger Club there, and they talk about what it's like owning one. I think this is a really interesting car. If you're in the market for a really good-looking convertible that shifts and is different, definitely have a look at this, because if you can pick that up between like 35 and 40,000 plus fees, you will have a lot of fun in that, and you probably might even make some money when they start ticking up again.
Now, Matt, do you know that I love series Land Rovers?
You've not mentioned it.
What, this episode maybe, but now I have. But they're not the best to drive. Even I will admit that. But how about this? It's on your screen now. It's just as rugged. It's just as iconic. And for sale at the Manor Park Classics auction on Saturday, Feb the 15th. It's a 1996 Toyota Hilux pickup. Now, this is the pickup that, remember, Top Gear tried to destroy by dropping a huge block of flats on it and chuck it in the sea. I think these are really good value because they are tough. They've got that kind of work cool about it in that, they've kind of labored through their life. And so they've done their honest toil. And I think they're good cars to drive compared to a Series Land Rover, I should say. This one, 11 to 13,000. It's bright red. It's jacked up. If it had some really big chunky wheels, it would look a bit better. 13 stamps in the service booklet, 5 former keepers. It's done 70,000 odd miles, and it's a Toyota. Would you like to drive that?
What a load of rubbish. I can tell you've been in New Zealand surrounded by sheep farmers, because this essentially looks like a sheep farming pickup truck. It's pretty horrible. It's been jacked up, as you say, which makes it even more horrible. It's
farm chic. This is what it's about.
Farm chic.
It's because the trouble is you've never had a proper job in your life. And you don't understand a car that has to work for its living. And this is a car that works for its living. There's a kind of honesty to commercial cars that this has really got all over.
Oh, yeah, lovely. The off-road cars you've had, the only off-road they've been is like Waitrose car park. So what you want about?
that can be treacherous sometimes.
Now this is horrible, and it's from the worst decade for any car design. This the 1990s, 1996. I think you've just gone a bit native down under, and you've started liking
Hilux
Japanese
is really cool
pickup trucks. Yeah, I'll give it a plug. So if you've got some fellow fans of Hiluxes, might be one. Do you want to give the details of where they can have a look at this?
Yeah, this is Manor Park Classics. It's a 1996 2.4 four-wheel drive, not the two-wheel drive one, on the 15th of February.
Okay, so some of the auction picks there for you to have a look at. If you do spot anything good at the auctions, give us a shout, actually. Give us a DM on Instagram, which is at the Tyre Kickers UK, or shoot us a note on our Facebook page, which is the Tyre Kickers. But you know what, Max? I reckon that Hilux is one that is definitely a candidate for extinction. And talking of which, should we get into that?
Exactly. Now, I have been on a long flight back from New Zealand, which has given me plenty of time to think, which is usually a dangerous thing. But in this time, I want to ask a big question. How long have we got? Not a question about life expectancy, but how long will we be allowed to drive internal combustion classic cars that need oil fields to work, push fumes into the air, and are generally a bit naughty for our planet? I'm talking classic car extinction. How long have we got left to drive old cars before they're banned?
You've reached that point in life where you're starting to think about the big questions, Max. I mean, to be honest, I reckon
What's
a fair
for tea?
while. To be honest, I just think a fair while. Yeah, I mean, climate stuff is currently at a peak in terms of discussions and actions and stuff that people want to do. But I kind of really don't think a few old bangers is going to upset the general population. I mean, you've got to bear in mind that we obviously classic cars. They turn heads when you see them because you don't see them that often. But there are still millions of diesels and petrol cars on the road, and we do sort of filter and mingle into that. I mean, every day in every town, hundreds and thousands of cars move about. So it's not like we're the only things on the road that are emitting stuff. I mean, obviously old cars emit more, but whatever political and environmental views there are, people will kind of fight for their cars. I mean, I think try taking them away. I think there's one thing. I think people are very, this movement is quite strong in terms of anti anything that pollutes, but try taking people's cars and classic cars away. I think there will be a fight.
But I think you're right. But will they actually be taken away? Because like drink driving, for example, or smoking in pubs or wearing a fur coat, will they just become socially unacceptable? The fear of the tut in the car park where you just pull up in something that's ticking over and blowing fumes and people are just and just the disapproval. I think if you're driving through a city and everybody's tutting at you, yeah, you would be bothered, to be honest. And I think it just becomes, the risk I'm worried about is it just becomes gradually socially unacceptable. And I think that's one of the things that bothers me slightly, because I'm thinking, how long have we got? Have we got 10 years? Have we got 15 years? And it's not just that. It's also, as electrification comes along, do we lose mechanics? Do we lose petrol stations?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good argument. I think one thing that would fight against politicians getting rid of or gunning for the classic car market is it does support an industry. There are jobs on the line in terms of this. You have got mechanics, restorers, parts suppliers, dealers, storage, even people transport moving up and down the country. And you can see from things like the NEC Classic Car Show how popular the industry, how popular the movement is. And beware the politician that kind of starts trying to unpick that, because that supports a real eco infrastructure of people. That side, classic cars are historic and they're part of our heritage and they're part of our story. And we don't have a motor industry anymore. And that is the rolling museum that moves around the country that people can see and be reminded of our past. I mean, it's a bit like trying to take pubs away. Yes, smoking ban came into pubs, but you try taking pubs away and people will put a fight. I mean...
Yeah, but again, this is my point. They won't be taken away. They'll just wither and die on the vine. And this is what I'm slightly worried about, is that it just might become a bit harder, particularly about petrol. As petrol stations become harder to find, does it mean that petrol becomes a lot more expensive because they make less of it, so there's less economies of scale? Does it mean you'll need a kind of extra permit to burn it or a carbon fuel tax? I mean, we're already seeing that with ULEZ, that polluting cars are banned from cities. So at the moment, there's exceptions for classic cars. But what about just if they took away those exceptions and then it just starts to limit where you can drive?
I think that's a positive, because you look at ULEZ and, classic cars before 1973, I think it is, are exempt. Now, that's quite encouraging, because you know what that says to me? That says that politicians aren't bothered about them. They don't think there's enough of them around that they'll get any tax money for them. So they've just left them exempt. Whereas cars after 73 and before 2000, whatever, are all included. So I think that's quite good news in a way, because we're not seen as a threat necessarily. So that's good in a way. Secondly, in terms of petrol and diesel and not being available, recent figures show that actually the sale of diesel cars is starting to go up again, because people have either they can't afford an electric car, or they maybe tried them. There is some anecdotal evidence to say that people have bought electric cars and they're going back to petrol and diesel. So the demand will be there for petrol and diesel for a long time to come, because you can't just grind countries to a halt by taking petrol and diesel away or taxing it away. And as you can see in the UK, we pay a lot for fuel. Fuel is very expensive here, but we still buy it because we have to. So I think there's those arguments that are positive. Also, you and I have had electric cars, and
Sadly,
we know
we've still got them as well. That's the problem, isn't it? You can't
and we know that they're not perfect. If you're ever had an experience of the free market charging network on any of the motorways, trying to get one of those things to work,
or being ripped off by the price,
or being ripped off, it's like 70p a mile to 70p a unit rather to charge your car on a motorway thingy, if you can get it to work, if your app works or whatever. We also, I think, as things go on, I mean, we talk about expensive EVs and things, but you've got to kind of stop and think about it. They're not actually very eco-friendly in the way they're made. And also, where's that electricity coming from? It's not off windmills. It's largely coming out of, gas-fired turbine power stations. So it's not the complete solution. So I think it's a bit of a lumpy start on that. I think hydrogen, as we talked about, will be the thing that maybe pushes through, actually, in terms of a sustainable thing. But there is biofuel for classic cars already. It's just very, very expensive. And I think biofuel has proved that you can run old cars on clean fuel that doesn't belch out loads of stuff. It's just very, very expensive. I think it's about £7 a litre or something, isn't it? Which is not far off the cost of diesel.
That's the risk, though, isn't it? That it just becomes more and more expensive to do what we do.
Well, it'll come down, won't it? I mean, it's a supply and demand thing, isn't it? So if there suddenly grows, if for whatever reason there's a growing demand for biofuel, it will come down. And then if governments want to promote that, then they put tax incentives on that. So if biofuel comes down to, I don't know, £3 a litre, and it's been proven. I mean, we've seen 1920s cars racing around Goodwood, with biofuel in. So if we could fill our car up with biofuel and still run it and enjoy it and didn't feel any difference, then that would be great as well. So, but I think, people do love classics. I think if you said ban them, a lot of people would feel that's a real invasion into our culture and heritage. I mean, it's a bit like saying fish and chip shops make you fat. Let's get rid of them, or let's dissuade everybody from going to fish and chip shops. I don't know. I just think it's so ingrained, and I think there's positives there, like the ULEZ thing, that we're not being targeted. You could drive your classic into the middle of London and not cause a problem. So they're not really targeting. So I don't think we're in their radar at the moment. Hopefully not.
I think for me, though, it's a concern, because I think it's the social pressure that might change what we do, and people just start to think, do we want these polluting things around our children? What if it's parked outside a school?
But that's not a realistic scenario. I'm not driving my Sunbeam Alpine round schools. I'm taking it to a pub or parking it up in a field, or going down to back lanes to for a day out. We're not rubbing our polluting cars in the face of people. We're out enjoying them in the summer, and I've got to say, I don't think I've had a negative comment in the time I've had a classic car. I don't think anybody's come up and said, polluting thing, get it off the road. Nobody said that. They've always said, oh, what a beautiful car, and asked questions about it.
Why is it leaking oil?
Well, yeah, don't ask that bit. I'm getting that sorted, okay? That's on my list. But I don't think anybody sees them as a real kind of horrible threat. I think you may be overthinking about it, unless you know something I don't.
What it's led me to is a conclusion. And the conclusion is, and this is really good common sense for all of us, is remortgage your house and buy all the classic cars you want now while you still can.
So, Max, I think this is one for our listener. What do you think? How long have we got before we're forced to meet in remote locations?
You mean like a car show in a wet field?
When classic car magazines are sold in brown wrapping paper and the police stop you for smelling of petrol? Get in touch. We are the Tyre Kickers UK.
That's all one word.
On Instagram, or The Tyre Kickers.
That's 3 words.
On Facebook. Okay, episode 24 of The Tyre Kickers, a brand new season for 2025. And thank you for all your comments over on our Instagram while we've been away. We may have been largely skiving for the last few weeks, but we did put out our bonus episode a week or two ago now, Max, when you went and had a look round the classic motor hub in Gloucestershire. How long were you there I was thinking this as I was listening to it. How long were you there before they asked you to leave?
Get out, sir. We're closing now. It's 5 o'clock. Please leave. Stop asking questions.
About princesses. Please just go away.
We don't stop marinas. Go away.
It was a good listen though, and I think you got some good information there, didn't you?
Yeah, check it out, because we talk about the state of the market and also look at some of the stock of their beautiful cars. Now, I do think they've got some really nice cars up there. And it was quite interesting because they did talk about the market, because we're always talking about the COVID bubble. But basically what they're saying is that the market now has gone back to where it was, say, in 2017, 2018, 2019. The COVID peak of prices went crazy, but they've just gone back to where they were before. So it's almost really like COVID didn't happen. Now, just going through all our responses from our many, many listener, a special thanks to new listener Benjamin Maltby, who left us a really nice review on Apple Podcasts, said he'd binged all the episodes while renovating his house. He's got a Series 1 Land Rover. Hooray! And in answer to our ongoing row about what exactly is a classic, oh God, not that one again, he's offering some, we thought Morris Minors were difficult. He's offering us some help. He's a lawyer by trade, so actually he'll be charging by the minute. So he likes to nail his definitions down. He says a classic car is one which is appreciated because of its age and not in spite of it.
Okay, that's quite a lawyery definition. What does that mean? Can we
I
break
don't know.
that down?
What does that mean?
Classic car appreciated because of its age, not in spite of it. Oh, well, it's sort of like your argument for the Morris Minor, isn't it? You're kind of, it's a bit, it went on too long, blah, blah, blah. It's just appreciated because of it.
Except I didn't do it in that voice.
Oh, yeah, but I was pulling that face while you were doing it. Okay. Does that make sense, or will we have to pay him another 250 quid to explain it? We'll have to find out.
Lose the case, yeah.
He had a couple of ideas for future shows as well, Max, as well. So,
did he? Like what?
Good.
Dangerous.
Well, no, I can't reveal it because we might nick them and put them in.
Oh, claim them our own.
Claim they're our own. And you know what lawyers are like. He'll be listening, won't he? He'll be trying to put some
He's
sort of...
going to take your house.
Actually, I'm going to have a look down the comment, actually, on the... I think he DM'd us, so I better check down the small print at the bottom. But thanks for listening, Benjamin. What he did, though, is he left us that Apple Podcast review. Please, 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 could you leave us an Apple Podcast review, because it does really, really help. I've got some other hot news that came in as well while you were away.
Okay.
While you were away internationally, we got some international news. We are apparently the #1 automotive podcast in Ireland.
Wow. How many automotive podcasts in Ireland are there?
Well, that doesn't bother us. Don't worry about the details. Carlos from podstatus.com got in touch to say that they crunched the numbers from Apple Podcasts and worked out that we go down as well as a pint of Guinness over in the Emerald Isle. See what I've done there? He also got some other chart info from around the world too. So he's broken down that. Have a look at this list, Max, and give us some of the headlines.
Can we exhume Fluff Freeman to read this? We're the 7th most popular automotive podcast in Denmark, the 13th in Canada, and the 37th in Austria.
Okay, so that's where we're popular. Here's where we're not popular. Norway. The Norwegians don't like us. We're 68th on the chart there for automotive podcasts.
And there's only 65 podcasts.
Well, yeah, that's right. What is wrong with the people of Norway? Is it you constantly going on about British Leyland and talking about knockdown kits in New Zealand? Is that knocking off
surely. Who would not want to listen to that?
It's a knockdown kit of our audience. It's knocking off numbers. So we maybe have to look at that. We need sort of Norwegian charm offensive. Have you got any ideas?
Well, no, not really. I mean, we could go on a road trip. We could take the road show up there if the road show exists. Do you remember the Radio 1 road show days? We could just make the Tire Kickers road show, but slightly cheaper. If you're Irish, though, and you love the show, can you please leave a review on Apple Podcasts? It doesn't matter where you're from, though. It helps, but it would be quite nice to hear from you.
So that about wraps it up for our first show of Series 2 of the Tire Kickers. We're back next time, and I've decided I want a classic V8. But which is best?
Plus, what would be the perfect classic Uber? What would you want ticking over outside the pub, waiting to drive you home?
Thanks for getting this far. If you like us, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or get in touch on Instagram or Facebook. It will all help bump us up in that very tricky Norwegian market.
See you next time.
Bye. Right, that was good rehearsal. Should we do it for real?
That seemed remarkably easy. I don't know why.
That's worrying.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?